For 6 hours, she said nothing. Then, at 30,000 feet, with the plane dying around her, she spoke once, into a military frequency that dead women are not supposed to use. 2 F-22 pilots heard her voice. They froze. Because they had attended her funeral. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The boarding gate at Dallas-Fort Worth smelled like burnt coffee and cold metal. Gate C-17. A Tuesday evening in November, the kind of evening that nobody would remember because nothing worth remembering was supposed to happen. Flight 1194 to Seattle-Tacoma was 90 minutes delayed, and the passengers waiting on the plastic chairs had that particular look people get when they have accepted their helplessness but have not yet forgiven anyone for it. Among the 212 people shuffling toward the jet bridge when the delay finally ended, one woman moved with a quality that was difficult to name precisely. She was not fast. She was not slow. She simply moved with an economy that suggested she had thought about every step before she took it. Dark pants. A plain gray jacket that had been washed so many times it had forgotten what color it started as. A single carry-on bag, military style, worn at both shoulder straps from actual use. Her hair was tied back in a tight, practical knot at the base of her neck. No makeup. A single silver watch on her left wrist, analog, not smart, not connected to anything. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass without looking at her face. Seat 31C. Middle seat, last section of the aircraft. She accepted this information the way a person accepts weather, as a fact about the world that does not require an emotional response. Her name on the boarding pass said Claire Bennett. Marketing analyst. Traveling alone. The name was attached to a real credit history, a real address in Portland, 2 years of tax returns, a gym membership she had never used, and a social media profile consisting entirely of reposted articles about home gardening and a single photograph of a coffee cup taken at an angle that revealed nothing about the face of the person holding it. What the name Claire Bennett did not have was any relationship to the woman using it. Her real name had not appeared on any legal document, any travel record, or any government database in 13 months. Not since a night in March of the previous year when a colonel in the United States Air Force had signed a form that classified her death as the result of a training accident at a facility in the Nevada desert. The colonel had done this because he had been told to do this, and because he was the kind of man who believed that being told to do something by people above him was the same as having a reason. She found her seat, placed her bag in the overhead bin with the careful efficiency of someone who had packed it to be accessible quickly, and sat down. The man in 31B, a heavyset salesman in a polo shirt who smelled of an airport bar, moved his elbow off the shared armrest without being asked. Something in the way she sat down communicated a boundary without words. She did not acknowledge this. She opened a paperback novel, well-read, cracked spine, and appeared to read it. She was not reading it. She was listening to the aircraft. An Airbus A321 at cruising altitude produces a specific library of sounds. Most people hear them as one continuous noise, white and formless, the mechanical equivalent of rain on a roof. But noise is never formless to the people who have been trained to take it apart. Every system on a modern aircraft has a voice, the hydraulic pump cycling, the pressurization system breathing, the fuel transfer mechanisms working in the background like a heartbeat, the specific tone of each engine at a given throttle setting. There are approximately 940 distinct sounds during a normal flight. She had catalogued most of them during 6 years of work that involved, among other things, knowing how aircraft behaved under extreme and unusual stress. She noticed the first anomaly at 1 hour and 22 minutes into the flight. It was not a loud sound. It was barely a sound at all. More a quality of vibration that moved through her seat cushion and up through the structure of the aircraft, a harmonic signature she recognized not because she had heard it on this flight before but because she had read the accident reports of 4 separate incidents in which a very similar vibration had preceded a very specific kind of structural failure. It lasted 3 seconds and stopped. She closed her book. She set it on her lap. Her hands rested on top of it, loose, the way a person's hands rest when they are prepared for something but have not yet decided what. She counted 60 seconds. The vibration returned. 4 seconds this time. Deeper. In the cockpit, Captain David Marsh was not yet worried. He had been flying for 19 years. He had dealt with pressurization warnings, bird strikes, hydraulic fluctuations, sensor malfunctions, and once a medical emergency that had required him to make an unscheduled landing in a field in rural Montana that he would tell the story of for the rest of his career. A small caution light on the secondary engine management display was something to log and monitor, not something to panic about. He said this to his first officer, Rachel Tao, who agreed with him, because she was good at her job, and good at her job meant not wasting energy on things that did not yet require it. The woman in 31C stood up and walked toward the rear galley. To anyone watching, she was a passenger going to use the bathroom. She walked at the same pace she had sat, unhurried, unremarkable. But her eyes moved in a pattern that was not the pattern of a person looking for a bathroom. She was reading the aircraft. Emergency exits and their mechanisms. Oxygen panel placements. The location of the emergency equipment behind the rear galley panel. The structural ribs of the fuselage visible between the overhead bins. She paused briefly near the intercom station between rows 28 and 29, studying the panel with slightly more attention than a normal passenger would bring to an intercom station. Then she continued to the lavatory, stepped inside, and locked the door. Inside, she pressed both palms flat against the outer wall of the fuselage and felt what she had suspected from her seat. The vibration was present in the aluminum skin of the aircraft. Faint, but there. And it was coming from the aft section, somewhere behind the center wing box, which meant it was originating from a place that had nothing to do with the sensor light that Captain Marsh was currently noting in his log with moderate interest. She thought about a man she had killed in a country she was not supposed to be in, doing things she was not supposed to be doing, who had been in the process of developing a method for bringing down commercial aircraft using precisely engineered harmonic resonance failures. Small, targeted vibrations introduced at structural frequency points. The kind of thing that looked exactly like a mechanical fault. The kind of thing that investigators would find in the wreckage and call an accident. His network had been dismantled. His research had been destroyed. Or it had been believed to have been destroyed, which was not the same thing. She flushed the toilet she hadn't used, returned to her seat, and continued not reading her book. The first serious alarm in the cockpit came at 2 hours and 14 minutes into the flight. It was not the caution light this time. It was a different system entirely, the hydraulic pressure monitoring panel, which began showing inconsistent readings across 2 of the 3 main hydraulic circuits simultaneously. Captain Marsh looked at the display for a long moment. First Officer Tao ran the diagnostic. The numbers made no sense. Primary system was showing normal pressure but anomalous flow rate. Secondary system was fluctuating in a pattern that did not correspond to any normal failure mode either of them had trained for. Marsh reached for the radio. Seattle Center, this is Flight 1194. We're seeing some unusual hydraulic readings up here. Nothing critical at present, but we're going to start looking at diversion options. The response from air traffic control was calm and professional. They were over Central Oregon, roughly 400 miles from Seattle, roughly 280 miles from Portland. Options existed. Marsh acknowledged them and went back to his instruments. Then the aircraft lurched. It was not turbulence. Anyone who had flown enough times knew the difference between turbulence and something structural, and the people on Flight 1194 who had flown enough times felt the difference in the soles of their feet and in the base of their stomachs. A lateral shudder ran through the airframe from somewhere aft of the wings, accompanied by a sound like a cable under tension snapping free. Overhead bins rattled. A child in row 14 screamed and then stopped screaming because his mother held him very tightly with both arms. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a tone that was 2 notes higher than the normal chime, which was not something the aircraft was designed to do but which happened anyway because something in the chime system had been briefly affected by the same thing that affected everything else. The woman in 31C did not flinch. Her hands tightened slightly on the armrests for 2 seconds, then relaxed. She was counting. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3. She was measuring the duration and character of the disturbance and arriving at conclusions that none of the other passengers could have formed because none of the other passengers had spent 6 years learning how aircraft died. Tyler, the college student in 31D, stared at her. "Did you feel that?" "Yes," she said. "What was it?" She looked at him for a moment. Not unkindly. "It was the beginning of something," she said. "When we land, you're going to help people off the aircraft through that exit." She pointed at the overwing exit without looking at it. "You're young and calm and you're sitting next to it. Do you understand?" He stared at her. "We're not landing yet. We will be soon. Do you understand?" He nodded, not because he was confident but because the certainty in her voice made disagreement feel like bad manners. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The flight attendant at the rear galley, a 12-year veteran named Marcus Webb, intercepted her before she had taken 4 steps. "Ma'am, the captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. I need you to return. Your hydraulic systems are failing in a pattern that is not consistent with normal mechanical breakdown," she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "Your pilots are managing symptoms without knowing the cause. If the aft servo actuator loses integrity in the next 15 minutes, they will lose pitch control and they will not have time to compensate. I need to get to the cockpit." Marcus Webb had been a flight attendant for 12 years. He had handled medical emergencies, drunk passengers, people having panic attacks, and once a man who attempted to open an aircraft door at altitude because he was convinced the plane was a simulation. He had a protocol for all of these situations. He did not have a protocol for what was happening in front of him, which was a calm woman in a gray jacket telling him something specific and technical in a voice that contained no fear whatsoever. "How do you?" he started. "I know what I know," she said. "There isn't time to explain how I know it. There is only time for you to decide whether you trust it." The aircraft shuddered again. A ceiling panel in row 26 came loose and hung by its wiring. Oxygen masks dropped in rows 15 through 19. Someone in the forward cabin started crying and then stopped because the crying required more energy than the silence. Marcus Webb stepped aside. She walked to the cockpit door and knocked 3 times. Sharp, authoritative, the knock of someone who expected the door to open. In the cockpit, Captain Marsh's radio call to Seattle Center was already halfway to a formal emergency declaration. The hydraulic situation had deteriorated in the last 6 minutes in a way that his training told him to take seriously and his experience told him was unprecedented. First Officer Tao had 3 different checklists open on her tablet simultaneously. Neither of them had time for whoever was knocking on the cockpit door. The intercom from the cabin crackled. Marcus's voice, tighter than Marsh had ever heard it, "Captain, I have a passenger who says she knows what's wrong with the aircraft. I know how that sounds. I'm asking you to hear her out. Tell her to sit down and fasten her." A different voice came through the intercom. Female. Precise. Completely calm, in the way that only training produces, not the calm of someone who doesn't understand the danger but the calm of someone who understands it exactly and has decided that fear will not improve the situation. "Captain, your hydraulic failure is originating from an induced vibration fracture in the aft servo actuator assembly. Your backup system is operational but it is routing pressure through a line that has been compromised by the same vibration cascade. This is why your control response is degrading rather than stabilizing. You are not dealing with a sensor problem or a standard hydraulic failure. You are dealing with a design failure. If you do not bypass the contaminated secondary line in the next 8 to 10 minutes, you will lose pitch authority entirely. I can walk you through the bypass procedure." Silence in the cockpit. Both pilots looked at the intercom as though it had just spoken a language they recognized but had never expected to hear. Marsh made a decision that violated 2 separate security directives and 1 federal regulation. He reached forward and unlocked the cockpit door. She stepped through the door and her eyes moved across the instrument panels the way a person's eyes move across a page they have read before, fast, complete, looking for the place where the expected and the actual diverged. She found it in 3 seconds. "That switch," she said, pointing at the overhead panel without consulting any diagram or checklist. "Hydraulic bypass valve for circuit 2. Close it. That will cut pressure to the alternate flight controls," Tao said. "It will cut pressure to a line that is actively feeding compromised fluid into your backup system. Right now your 2 hydraulic circuits are working against each other. Your controls are not unresponsive. They are receiving conflicting commands and cannot resolve them. Close the valve." Marsh looked at Tao. She looked back at him. In her eyes was a question that had no good answer. Do we trust a passenger we have never seen before who appeared from the back of the aircraft and is speaking with the confidence of someone who has done this before? He closed the valve. The effect was not immediate. For 4 seconds, nothing changed. Then, slowly, perceptibly, in a way that Marsh felt in his hands before he saw it on any instrument, the control yoke began to respond with less resistance. The lag decreased. The aircraft was still damaged. It was still descending at a rate that was too fast for comfort. But it was responding again, and a pilot who has spent 19 years learning to read an aircraft through his hands does not mistake the difference between a dead aircraft and a sick one. "Engine management," she said, already looking at the thrust displays. "Reduce engine 2 to 61% thrust and increase fuel flow by 7%. You have a compressor blade that is resonating out of phase with the turbine stage. You cannot fix it at altitude, but you can stabilize the resonance pattern and keep the engine running long enough to get this aircraft on the ground. That is not standard procedure for any failure mode I have in my training," Tao said. "Standard procedures are written for standard failures. This is not standard." A pause. "I am aware of how this sounds. You have 30 seconds to decide." Tao made the adjustment. The engine temperature, which had been climbing steadily toward the red line, leveled. It did not drop immediately. It held. Then, slowly, it began to fall. "Who are you?" Marsh said. She was already looking at the navigation display, calculating approach paths, cross-referencing airport data with the aircraft's current rate of descent and the degraded performance envelope she was working with. "Your best option right now is McChord Field. Joint Base Lewis McChord. Military runway, longer than Seattle-Tacoma, better emergency response capability, and you have authority to declare emergency and divert without clearance delay under FAR 91.3. McChord is a military installation. And you are a commercial aircraft declaring emergency with 162 people on board and degraded flight controls. Call them." He called. The 2 F-22 Raptors had been on a training exercise over the Cascades when the emergency frequency lit up. Call signs Viper 1 and Viper 2, operating out of Joint Base Lewis McChord, they were redirected to escort Flight 1194 and provide visual assessment of the aircraft's exterior condition. They came alongside the struggling Airbus at altitude with the casual ease of aircraft that were built to operate at speeds 3 times faster than the thing they were flying next to. The pilot of Viper 1, Captain James Kowalski, had been flying F-22s for 7 years. He had escorted emergency aircraft before. He had never heard anything quite like the exchange he was now monitoring on the emergency frequency as a voice from inside the commercial aircraft, not the captain, not air traffic control, but a third voice, female, precise, coordinated the approach to McChord with a knowledge of military airfield operations that no commercial passenger should possess. She was giving them runway foam coverage requirements. She was specifying the positioning of crash rescue equipment. She was giving the tower the exact weight of the aircraft, the current hydraulic pressure percentage, the engine status, and the expected approach speed given the degraded control surfaces, all in terminology that was not commercial aviation terminology. It was military aviation terminology. The kind learned in places that did not issue public documentation. Kowalski keyed his internal comms. "Bishop, you catching this?" His weapons systems officer, Lieutenant Aaron Bishop, had been running the voice through a background recognition process for the last 4 minutes. "Catching it. Running ID now." A pause that felt longer than it was. "Viper 1, I've got a classified match on this voice. Confidence level 91%. Who is it?" Another pause. When Bishop spoke again, his voice had a quality it hadn't had before. "Careful. The way a person speaks when they are holding something that could break. The match is against a JSOC personnel file. Call sign, Shadow 4. The file is marked Kia. 13 months ago. Training accident, Nevada." Kowalski's hand stopped moving on the flight stick. He did not speak. He did not breathe. Outside his canopy, 500 feet to his left, the crippled Airbus continued its slow, damaged descent toward the runway lights of McCord, guided by a dead woman. His wingman's voice came over the internal channel, quiet, almost a whisper. "Viper 1, are you still there?" Kowalski was still there. He just could not find the words for what he was looking at. A ghost was flying that plane home. And he was frozen at 30,000 feet, watching her do it. "She's bringing them in," he said finally. "Yes, sir. Then we're going to make sure she gets the chance to finish." He keyed the emergency frequency. "Flight 1194, Viper flight has you visual. You are clear on all sides. McCord has foam on both runway borders. You are first and only traffic. You have this." The voice from inside the aircraft came back immediately. Still calm. Still precise. And for just a moment, one single moment that Kowalski would think about for years afterward, carrying something underneath the precision that might have been gratitude, or recognition, or the particular feeling of a person who has been operating alone for a very long time hearing a friendly voice. "Copy, Viper flight. Thank you." She turned back to the instrument panels. "To Marsh, you're going to start your turn for final approach 2 miles earlier than the glide slope indicator tells you to. Your control response is delayed by approximately 3 seconds. If you wait for the normal turn point, you will overshoot. Trust the early turn. Let the aircraft drift into it rather than forcing it. Bank angle no more than 12 degrees. Marsh nodded. He didn't argue. He had stopped arguing 4 minutes ago. McCord's runway 34 left was 13,000 feet of concrete lit from both sides by emergency lighting and bordered by fire suppression foam laid down by 4 separate crash tenders. The foam caught the runway lights and turned them amber and white and made the whole approach look, from the cockpit, like flying toward the inside of a lantern. 15 miles out. Altitude 9,000 feet. The aircraft was descending at a rate that was still too fast but manageable with the hydraulic bypass in place and the engine performance temporarily stabilized. 10 miles out. She talked Marsh through the gear deployment. "Not yet, wait, the hydraulics needed to build pressure for the one operation they had left in them." 7 miles. The gear came down. 3 green lights, after 11 agonizing seconds, confirmed locked. She exhaled once, quietly, and returned to the approach calculation. 5 miles. "You are going to land this aircraft fast," she said to Marsh. "Do not try to bleed off speed on final. You do not have the control authority to recover from a stall attempt. Better to come in with energy and use the runway than to stall short and not make it at all. McCord has the runway length. Use it." 3 miles. The aircraft began its turn. Marsh started it early, as she had instructed, and the yoke resisted him for 2 full seconds before the nose began to come around. Slow. Reluctant. Like an animal that has been hurt and does not trust the hands that are trying to help it. You have it, she said. Hold the bank. Don't add input. Let it turn. 2 miles. The runway was dead ahead, a long straight path of light in the darkness. 1 mile. She stood behind Marsh's seat with both hands on the seat back, not touching the controls, but present. Close enough that when she spoke, it was only for him. 19 years, she said quietly. You have done this 19 years. Fly the aircraft to the ground. All the way. Don't stop flying until it stops. The wheels hit at 168 knots. It was not a smooth landing. The main gear struck the concrete with a jolt that ran through every frame of the aircraft and rattled the overhead bins and made the passengers collectively and involuntarily produce a sound that was half scream and half something else, something that didn't have a word, the sound of people who have been very afraid and are now experiencing something that might be survival. The nose came down. Marsh deployed the spoilers. One thrust reverser activated, the right engine only. The left was still running in the compromised mode she had stabilized it in. The asymmetric thrust tried to yaw the aircraft left. He corrected. She watched him correct and said nothing because there was nothing to say. He knew what he was doing. He had always known what he was doing. 11,000 feet of runway used. 12,000. The deceleration was catching. 13,000. The aircraft slowed from a race to a roll to a crawl to a stop, with exactly 400 feet of concrete remaining between its nose gear and the end of the runway. No one moved for 5 seconds. Then Captain David Marsh put his head down on the yoke for exactly 3 seconds, raised it, and said, in a voice that was very steady and very quiet, "All stations, Flight 1194. We are on the ground. We are stopped. All passengers, brace is released." First Officer Rachel Tao was crying. She did not appear to notice she was crying. The woman stepped back from the cockpit. "Get your passengers off," she said. "Right now. You don't know if there's fuel risk." Marsh turned to thank her. To ask her name. To ask 100 questions that had been building since she had walked through that door. She was already gone. The evacuation took 11 minutes. All 162 passengers and 6 crew members exited the aircraft on the emergency slides. 14 minor injuries, all from the hard landing or the slide descent, sprained ankles, a broken wrist, a gash on a forehead from an overhead bin that had not stayed closed. Nothing life-threatening. Nothing that required more than the emergency medical teams already staged along the taxiway could handle in under an hour. Colonel Patricia Ware, base commander of Joint Base Lewis McChord, had been watching from the command vehicle. She had been briefed 17 minutes before landing by Captain Kowalski, who had transmitted his voice recognition data on a secure channel, and she had spent those 17 minutes in a state of controlled and professional alarm that was the military equivalent of standing very still in a room that was on fire. Shadow 4 was dead. She had attended the memorial. She had read the classified incident report. She had signed the documents that removed the name from active records. And now her airfield was receiving a civilian aircraft that had been guided to safety by the voice from those documents, and when the aircraft stopped and the slides deployed and the passengers streamed out into the cold November air, she stood at the edge of the emergency perimeter and watched every single face. She was not there. The pilot described her. The flight attendant described her. The passenger in seat 31D, a college student named Tyler who would later tell the story to anyone who would listen, described her in the exact terms that everyone who had encountered her used: calm, certain, unremarkable to look at, impossible to forget. The seat in 31C was empty when the investigators walked the aircraft. The carry-on bag was gone from the overhead bin. The paperback novel was still on the seat, left behind, which might have been carelessness or might have been deliberate, a small signal that she had been there and had chosen to leave proof of it. On the tray table in front of 31C, written on a cocktail napkin in small, precise handwriting, was a note. The lead NTSB investigator read it once, read it again, and then called for the most senior intelligence official on the scene. The note said, Check the aft empennage structure for resonance fractures at the servo actuator mounting points. You will find evidence of externally induced harmonic failure, not mechanical fatigue. The pattern matches a method developed by a network that was believed to have been dismantled 14 months ago. It was not fully dismantled. Someone with access to the original research is still operational. This was not an accident. It will happen again unless you find them first. It was signed with a single word that meant nothing to the NTSB investigator but caused the intelligence officer next to her to go very still. Shadow. She drove north on I-5 in a rental car she had obtained from a counter in the civilian terminal using a third identity that was not Claire Bennett and was not her real name. The clerk had not looked at her face. Nobody ever looked at her face, and she had long ago decided whether that fact was something to be sad about or something to be grateful for, and had settled, not entirely comfortably, on grateful. Her real name was Captain Nora Vance. United States Air Force. Combat Controller, Special Operations Support, 6 years and 3 months of operational service in assignments that were not on any public record. She had been to places that official maps did not show and done things that official histories would never describe. She had been very good at it. Not because she was fearless, she had never been fearless, but because she was precise, and in situations where imprecision killed people, precision was the closest thing to a superpower that existed in the real world. 13 months ago, her last operation had gone wrong in the specific way that operations go wrong when someone inside has decided that protecting themselves is more important than protecting the mission. A safe house compromised. Assets lost. People dead who should not have been dead. And when the investigation began, Nora Vance had been in the wrong position at the wrong moment, with the wrong access to the wrong classified materials, and someone with more institutional power than she had decided that the cleanest resolution was to make her the explanation. She had been offered the standard arrangement: accept responsibility for things she had not done, accept the cover story of a training accident, accept a new identity and a modest amount of money, and the unspoken promise that if she ever surfaced again, the people who had arranged her disappearance would exercise their remaining options. She had accepted, because the alternative was a court-martial based on fabricated evidence that she could not contest without revealing the existence of operations that she was legally prohibited from acknowledging. So she had died in Nevada. And Sarah Bennett and Rosa Delgado and Claire Bennett had lived in her place, moving through a country that did not know her, doing nothing that would draw attention, trying very hard to be the ordinary woman that her documentation described. She had not been entirely successful. You could change a name. You could change a face, to a limited degree. You could change the sound of your voice in conversation, learn new habits, wear different clothes, stop carrying yourself the way you had been trained to carry yourself. But you could not change the way your mind processed information. You could not turn off the part of your brain that cataloged sounds and made calculations and noticed the small wrong details in the world before your conscious mind had finished forming the thought. You could not stop being what you had spent 6 years becoming. Tonight, that inability had saved 162 people. She drove and did not turn on the radio and thought about what she had written on the napkin. It had been a risk. It was specific enough that the right people, if there were any right people left, would understand it. It was signed in a way that would be traced, eventually, to a classified file that officially described a dead woman. Which meant that somewhere tonight, someone in a building she had worked in was picking up a phone and calling someone else, and the word that had been used to describe her for 13 months, dead, was being replaced by a different word. Alive. She wasn't sure yet whether that was better or worse. She pulled off at a truck stop north of Olympia, parked at the far end of the lot away from the lights, and sat for a while. Then she opened the glove compartment and removed the burner phone she had placed there that morning, when she had first suspected what kind of day it was going to be. She dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. The voice that answered was male, older, with the careful flatness of a man who had learned long ago not to put anything in his voice that he wasn't prepared to account for. "This number is for emergencies," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." A pause. Then, "Nora. I need a meeting." Off the record, off the books, somewhere that doesn't have cameras. They'll be looking for you. I know. That's why I'm calling you instead of them. Another pause, longer this time. Outside the windshield, the truck stop lights reflected off the wet asphalt of the parking lot in long orange streaks. The night was very quiet. There's a place, he said, where we used to do the winter training. You know the one. I know it. 3 hours. I'll be there in 2.5. She hung up. She sat for one more minute in the dark, in the quiet, in the particular stillness of a person who has been running for a long time and has just decided, with full awareness of what it will cost, to stop running. 162 people were alive tonight who would not have been alive if she had stayed in her seat and finished not reading her book. Somewhere, the network that had built the device responsible for tonight was still operational. They had tried once. They would try again. She started the car. Some things, she had learned, do not let you retire from them. Some things follow you across every name and every border and every quiet attempt at an ordinary life, and when they catch up with you, you discover that the choice you have been avoiding was never really a choice at all. It was only ever a question of when. She pulled back onto the highway and drove north, into a night that was already moving faster than she wanted it to, toward whatever came next.